ADHD family. I'm Yakini with ADHD Love. Welcome to another episode of ADHD Love Parent Talk, where technically I talk about everything around ADHD, but today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I actually wanted to focus on a topic, anxiety. So recently, by this taping, I had talked to Dr. Carrie Jackson about ADHD and anxiety. You know, when someone has ADHD, when they have anxiety, and when there's a mix of both. But the topic of anxiety is coming up so much, especially right now during this stressful time. So I really wanted to dive a little bit deeper into that. And so I have my guest, Tati, who actually talked to me on Instagram. She was one of my first guests, so I'm very excited that she came back. And plus the video was a little bit fuzzy. She looked great, but I was fuzzy. So I actually asked her to come back and have this conversation again. So Tati, I'm so excited that you are here. So please introduce yourself to the audience and tell a little bit about your background and then why you know so much about anxiety.
Yes, I'm really excited to be here. I'm glad that you invited me back. So I am a licensed therapist and also a high functioning anxiety coach. So I have 10 years of experience working in the field of mental health, and I have a master's degree in mental health counseling. So I have experience working with all different populations in community mental health. So that's like for nonprofit organizations. I've worked with children, adolescents, and adults, as well as like families and couples. And now I have a private practice where I specialize in helping adults with anxiety and stress and trauma. And then I also have my coaching business, like I said, where I provide coaching for high functioning anxiety, which is a whole separate topic, but we'll focus today just on like general anxiety.
That's very cool. So your practice, where is it based in?
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the anxiety piece, so you've known about that, or you've learned about this over time. So is that, you said it's something that you actually went to school for, or is this come during your, as you are working with different clients?
Yeah, so I went to school for mental health counseling. And so, that's like the general education on mental health and treating any mental health disorders. And then, throughout my experience after graduating and through my internship was where I learned a lot about the different types of anxiety and as well as trauma, because, things like PTSD is also an anxiety disorder. And then I've also personally struggled with anxiety pretty much my entire life, as long as I can remember. So it's something that I've also worked a lot on myself, educating myself and doing tons of research and learning, and also just like implementing those techniques that I've learned myself, like through cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as things like mindfulness, which are both two things that are really helpful when it comes to anxiety.
Perfect. And we'll dig a little bit more into that. So the first thing is, just to set the stage, what is anxiety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anxiety is an emotion. It's also a mental health disorder. And when it comes to anxiety, like it goes on a spectrum. But essentially, it's a reaction to a perceived or real threat. So the root of anxiety is fear. And so a lot of times, anxiety can come from, let's say, normal anxiety might be feeling anxious before a test. So there's that fear, uncertainty of, how am I going to do? Am I going to fail? And there can also be like a lot of anxiety happening right now when it comes to COVID and the uncertainty with that, because that's coming from the fear of what could happen and like worrying about oftentimes the worst case scenario.
So the symptoms, so for people to really recognize, is it truly anxiety that I'm going through or that my children are going through? What are some of those symptoms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with anxiety, there's both the psychological symptoms, so that can include like your thoughts. So maybe you're worrying a lot, or you're overthinking, or you can also have difficulty focusing or paying attention, feeling like overwhelmed, or scatterbrains. And then there's a lot of physical symptoms, such as like an increased heart rate. A lot of times people have digestive symptoms, especially in children. A lot of times they might say like my stomach hurts, when it could really be anxiety, because a lot of times you can feel like that pit in your stomach, or like that something bad's going to happen. Also things like muscle tension, maybe tension in like your shoulders or back. So there's a lot of those physical symptoms that go along with anxiety.
Yeah, I know for me, I mean, anxiety is one of the struggles that I've had throughout my life. And I shared this with you when we were on Instagram. And um, some days I just feel like paralyzed, right? And when it's just so bad, I'm just laying in bed. I just don't want to move. My mind is racing. I'm feeling sick. And it could be, and the funny thing is, it could be a major situation, and it could be, oh my goodness, did I fail my test in college type
Mm-hmm.
thing. I mean, but it
Mm-hmm.
all felt the same because I just, for my test, for example, maybe a major exam for me to graduate from college. And it's like, it's so overwhelming. So I can see, and it is sometimes perceived, right? In the back of
Mm-hmm.
my mind, I know that I did well, right? But just that inkling of, am I going to fail, or if I'm going to have to, repeat school or whatever it may be, it's just as powering as, a true, like you said, threat. So how do you deal with that? How do you really be able to tell the difference when it's, like you said, that perceived, it's just perceived. How do you manage that type of situation versus a true threat where you need to just exit the situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point that you raised, that it can oftentimes feel the same, no matter what, like the severity or the degree of the threat, if it's like you're actually confronted with like a bear in the
Mhm.
woods, or if it's something in your mind where you're concerned about how you did on an exam. And the way to cope with that is to really first like identify what is the fear, um, what's really going on here, because a lot of times our brains are blowing it out of proportion. So really looking at what's the worst case scenario in this situation, and could I cope with that?
Mhm.
If we look at the example of a test, right, the worst case scenario is that you fail.
Mhm.
Could you cope with it? Sure. I'm sure that, you've coped with failing tests in the past and you've survived,
Mhm.
and it feels really scary in the moment, but you're going to be able to cope with that and deal with that and all the emotions that come up.
So versus a situation where, like you said, the bear situation, I mean, what are
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that people need to do? Because people tend to freeze, right? They tend to stay in certain situations. They tend to deal with that anxious moment. They tend to lay there paralyzed and be sick. How do they work through that?
Yeah. So, the other way to come at it is, if sometimes it's hard to deal with your thoughts in the moment and to look at what that fear is when you're in that state of like paralysis, or what's called like fight or flight or freeze.
Mhm.
And that's when it helps to come at it physically, and doing things like relaxing your body physically, like something as simple as taking deep breaths and ensuring that you're not breathing into your chest, but really breathing fully into your belly.
Mhm.
And doing that for 2 to 5 minutes is going to help to calm your body physically. And it kind of tells your brain, like, I'm safe. There's no danger, everything's fine in the moment. And it helps to calm down those physical sensations that are coming up, and that feeling of being maybe like frozen or not knowing what to do.
Makes sense. So when is it
Mhm.
at a point where you need to ask for help? So whether it is, themselves, or whether they need to get help for their children, when is it at that point where they just need to get some assistance?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the point can come when it's really interfering with your day to day life. A big part of anxiety is avoidance. And so a lot of times it can look like maybe avoiding doing things like for school, it may be avoiding for school. For a student or for a child, it can be maybe avoiding like doing homework, or, I mean, nowadays we're not always going into school, but it could be like not wanting to go to school or doing things like that. So if it's for an adult, like if it's interfering with your day to day doing the things that you need to do, and it's really becoming cumbersome and overwhelming, I think that's a sign. And it doesn't even necessarily always need to get to that point, because, you know, I think a lot of times people think my problems aren't big enough to seek out help or to go to therapy, when in reality, you don't need to have severe symptoms to seek out help. And a lot of times it can help to get support, whether it's going to see a therapist, or in with a child, if it's going to the school counselor, school psychologist, um, in advance, like before things get really bad, because that can help either the adult or the child to build up those skills and those coping techniques so that they know what to do, let's say, if they start to feel worse.
Okay. So what are there some other methods to work through it? So you had talked about, some of the breathing, exercises, taking that deep breath. Are there any other methods to really help them work out, say for example, they don't feel it's enough for them to go and see someone, but they need to work through it, right? What are some of the
Mm-hmm.
other things that they can do?
Yeah, so there's different tons of different things that you can do. One of the things that I find is not always immediate, but it's very transformational, and it has been personally for me, is meditating. Because things like practicing meditation and mindfulness, which is really just being aware in the present, that's going to help you to be aware of those thoughts and those physical sensations that are coming up, so that you can recognize what that feels like and choose how you want to respond, instead of just like reacting to whatever's coming up. So I think just a simple way to do that is there's a free app that's called Insight Timer,
Hmm.
and you can look up, free short, like 5-minute guided meditations. And they also have ones for kids as well. So I think that can be a great thing to do, a parent with their child, to start that habit with them.
That's very good. You know what? Some other things that I've used, so like with my child or children, actually, sometimes calming music really helps them because they're very tied to music. I've played it all of their lives. And so sometimes the right type of music really does calm them. It calms them. Like yesterday, I actually used Calm, the app Calm.
Yeah.
And I play that at night. And when I play it, it really does. It's one of the things that I do to help them fall asleep. And the other thing is the meditation piece. My daughter falls asleep right away, but my son, he has to do his breathing exercises. It's almost like preparing for bed, right? And
Mm-hmm.
do that, either we do breathing or we do a combination of the I call it, the mindfulness exercises, with the deep breaths and really visualizing the ocean or whatever it may be. And
Mm-hmm.
that works wonders. So we actually have like a set routine. I have to do like 2 or 3 things to really get him prepared, but it really does calm him because he's always like excited. I mean, obviously it's the ADHD piece of it, but the anxious piece too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's always like all over the place, and that has really helped. The music, the mindfulness exercises, just and the breathing, just calming. It's just been amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all great techniques, and it sounds like those things have been helpful for your children. Like, I think music is great, and another easy one that you can do, or you can teach your child to do in any moment, is a simple. It's called a grounding technique, but it's really just kind of like grounding yourself in the present moment, and it's paying attention to your five senses.
Okay.
So you're going one by one through your senses. So what can you see? What can you feel, and really like touching it and feeling it? What can you hear, smell, and taste? And that's really helpful for anxiety, because it gets you out of your head and out of those anxious thoughts and worries and into the present, which really helps to calm your body in the moment and kind of recenter you to what's going on.
I like that. That's good. I forgot about those exercises, but that is good.
Mm-hmm.
So for those people who have multiple diagnoses, be it ADHD or depression or whatever it may be that they're going through, and they are dealing with anxiety, how do you work through that when you're dealing with multiple diagnoses? I mean, generally, I know every situation is different, but just how do you work through that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think ultimately, if you're struggling with multiple diagnoses, the best step is to get professional help and guidance. The thing is that I mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy earlier, and that's really a technique that's helpful for all three of those. You know, it's helpful for anxiety, depression, and ADHD. And it's really just looking at your thoughts, the way you think about things, and the things that you do, your behaviors, and how they affect how you feel, and just like your emotions and your mood throughout your day. So I think that can be a good place to look at, like if you're seeking out professional support, if you're struggling with multiple diagnoses at the same time.
Nice. Okay. So is there any books or is there any, any other material, YouTube channels, podcasts, anything that you can recommend for people to listen to, including yours? I know you have a podcast too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have a podcast about anxiety, specifically high functioning anxiety, but I talk about anxiety in general. It's called Calmly Coping, and you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. There's also a website. It's the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. So they have good like general resources, and then specifically now on like things like COVID anxiety and all different types of anxiety. I mentioned Insight Timer, which is a great app for meditations and mindfulness, and they also have courses on there. And then another good app that I could recommend is called Sanvello, and that's specifically for like different techniques for coping with anxiety and depression. So I think those are great places to look.
Very nice. So you talk about high functioning. I'm sure somebody's going to wonder, what is the difference? So what is the high functioning person? What does that mean?
Yeah, so high functioning anxiety, and there's different, there's also high functioning depression and autism and different mental diagnoses. But high functioning anxiety, it's not a mental health diagnosis. It's kind of a phrase or a type of anxiety that's been coined just collectively throughout, I believe, recent years. It could have been around longer. But when we look at somebody who has high functioning anxiety, you're doing well in school and at work, and you actually probably are doing very well. Maybe you put a lot of pressure on yourself, and you're maybe what's like a high achiever or maybe even overachiever. And that is a lot of times driven by anxiety, like that fear of failure or of not like pleasing, like that people pleasing behavior. And so the thing with anxiety is that it can hold you back. Like I talked about that avoidance. But with high functioning anxiety, that anxiety propels you forward because you're afraid of what if I'm not doing enough, or what if I'm not making other people happy, and things like that.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay. So any other thoughts just to close it up? Anything that we miss? Any tips, tricks that you would like to share with the audience?
I guess the tips I can give, or just like a final thing, is that, there's nothing wrong with you for struggling with anxiety or depression or ADHD. Especially recently when it comes to anxiety, I think a lot of people are experiencing that now, and it comes from uncertainty and not knowing what to expect and that fear. And it is something that, although it feels really uncomfortable and unmanageable in the moment, there are things that you can do in order to feel better and in order to cope with whatever's coming up for you.
Very nice. So if they wanted to get a hold of you or had any more questions, can you share your Instagram handle or any other way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. My handle is at Tatiana GLPC. And then I have a website. It is becalmwithtati.com.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Again, thank you for coming back. I'm excited to talk with you again. I mean, like I said, anxiety is such a huge topic today. I mean, it's always been there, but people are experiencing it in a way that they've never experienced it before. So that's why I definitely felt it was a great time to just discuss this. And unfortunately, it's going to be around for a while, because like you said, with our current situation in the world, I mean, this is going to drag out for a little while. So I just thought this was a very important topic to bring up, especially if people just don't know what's going on with them. It's like, why am I feeling this? I didn't feel this before, right? Why are these emotions all over the place? So I just thought this was really important to talk about.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you so much for having me on here again. And I think, it can be helpful to have this information if this is something that you're struggling with for the first time, or it can also be the case where maybe this is something you've been struggling with for a while and you didn't even know it, or you weren't even aware of it. Because I know that was the case for me where, like I said, I've had anxiety pretty much my entire life, but I didn't even know it until I was in college and I learned about this stuff. So I think that can definitely be the case too. And, to be cliche, knowledge is power.
Agreed. All right. So thank you again. So everyone, I'm always excited. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining Tati and I talking about the subject of anxiety. If you would like more content like this, definitely make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because every time a new video comes out, it will notify you. And if you like this video, hit the like button. All right. Have a wonderful day. All right. Bye, Tati.
Bye.